Hi, I'm Dave. Katja and I have teamed up with U.S. Captain Training to bring you a vlog about interesting people in the marine industry. On this episode, we're talking to Glenn Shivel, owner of Callinectes Boatworks in Kennebunk, Maine. He talks about his life growing up, how he got started into boating, his decisions to make a career change into the marine industry. We take a tour of his shop, shows us boats he's been working on, some boats he has for sale, and then we end with some sailing on his Town Class 17 sailboat.
Okay, if I start with the same question?
Please do! Please do! Maybe I can give you the same answer.
And then we'll just flow right back into it, hopefully. Okay,
Yeah.
what was my first? My first question was, okay, so are you from Maine originally?
I'm not from Maine. I'm a transplant. My wife and I moved up from North Carolina back in '99 to attend the Landing School of Boat Building Design after about 14 years experience as an engineer. And so
How did you get into boating?
how did I get into boating? Okay, so we find of different levels of finding freedom throughout our life. When we're little and your mom's arm, and mom has to carry everywhere, and you start to crawl. It's your first level of freedom. You get to explore on your own terms, and then you get to walk. Put your parents on defense because you're everywhere, going fast and things like that. And then it usually goes to a bicycle. And then for me, it went from motorcycles to boats. And I was introduced to captain my own boat at the age of like 8 or 9. And so I was given permission to use the boat just as long as I can see. I grew up on Summers on a family farm on tidal tributary to Chesapeake Bay called the Rappahannock River. And it's 2 miles wide where our farm is. And so I had a 2-mile radius of this river to go fishing and just go exploring. And at the age of 9 and 10, to have that freedom at such a young age, piloting a Boston whaler, 7-foot Boston whaler with that 85 horsepower motor, and that was my ultimate freedom as a child. And then you get to drive later on. So that's how I got into boating, was just having that lucky experience of having a place that had that boat, and my parents and grandparents giving me that freedom. And so I grew up with the smell of 2-cycle exhaust. And that's still one of my favorite smells, is go and start up a 2-stroke engine, you go, ah. It just takes me back to my childhood, and that freedom, that early expression of freedom.
Was your family a motorboat family or a sailing family?
Started off as motoring. Started off motoring. And when I was probably 10 or 11, the family acquired a Watkins 27 sailboat, a sloop. It's a big, heavy tub, but it had everything on it. And that was when I was introduced to sailing. And I remember my great-grandfather hired a captain to teach the family, the 3 generations, how to sail. And I was the one that seemed to retain it at the age of 10. And the other, I guess the other parents were too distracted with other things to get it all. So it seemed like it just took to it real easily. And then from sailing that boat, got a Hobie Cat at the age of 12 or 13, and was sailing that by myself. We had a few other boats. I would sail with my relatives in the Severn River up near Annapolis. They had an Irwin something, 40-something, and then a Cal something. So sailed that as a kid out of Annapolis, and then went to sailing school for a summer. We raced windmills, which are sort of like a Lightning, fiberglass version of a Lightning. We would race that out on the, I think it was Windmill Point on the Rappahannock River, just where it exits out into the Chesapeake. So that was my introduction. And I didn't really sail when we had a family. My wife and I started creating a family. I hadn't sailed. So it had been about 25 years since I got back into sailing. That was only about 3 years ago, when a friend of mine had been restoring town-class sloops that he had purchased off of an old Maine boys camp. And they were getting rid of their fleet, so he bought 6 or 7 of them. And the last couple he had me restore. And the last one we did together, his wife says he doesn't want to sell this one, he wants you to have it. And he wanted me to have it because we vacation next to his shop on a lake there, and he has trouble getting out of the shop. So every Friday during summer, we go have the ice cream regatta on Androscoggin Lake, and that was his intention, was for me to have a boat to get him out of the shop. So I remember that I put the boat in the water and rigged it and was out sailing. I said, "Wow, this is what I remember from my childhood." Talking about my childhood, that freedom and just the wind on your face and on your back, and just you reading reading the wind, and it was just lovely. It reminded me how difficult it is to sail on lakes and ponds because the wind changes. You have that down in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
The wind changes 30 degrees constantly, and it gusts, and it ends up nothing. And it's the same thing. So you have to keep yourself on your toes. But yeah, that's how I got introduced to boating. But not this.
So you were an engineer before.
I was an engineer for 13 or 14 years. I specialized in, my background's in mechanical engineering and a master's in industrial engineering. So I was always hired to do project managements from small to global, introducing new technology. I've also designed parts for turbochargers and large reciprocating engines, and help corporations analyze their efficiencies and how to improve their process. And that's what my specialty was. That's what took me basically every state east of the Mississippi. And my wife is also an engineer. She was more into management, product line management, and things of that nature. So we found ourselves first major move, we found ourselves in Mississippi. And we wanted to get back closer to family and closer to water. So we made a move, and the closest we got was North Carolina, landlocked. And that's where I found this article, I think it was in 1998, about from Wooden Boat, about this interesting school called the Landing School of Boat Building Design here in Maine. And that magazine article made it from our small library, the bathroom, to the bedroom, to the kitchen, to the living room, table by the couch, to the coffee table. And my wife says, what is it with this magazine? It just follows me around. Says, oh, there's an article I like to look at. Says, what's it about? It says about the school of boat building. You can learn boat building. And she and I had talked about, says, we haven't been successful getting close to the water. We're having a second kite comes up. You're spending a lot of time traveling with the company. I think it's time to do something else. And she encouraged me to take that leap and find my wings on the way down. So I spent, it was in 1999 when I finally got to the school. I met Dave, and that program was 10 months long. And then I stayed on a second year as a teaching assistant. And then they wanted me to help run the school, so I ran the school, helped run the school for 7 or 8 years until I decided to start this business. And then when I was starting this business, they asked me to become a trustee of the school. So I did that for ever how long the term was, and now I just teach when they ask me to teach.
So did that article, was that boat building, was that a new thought when you read the article, or had you been thinking about it?
No, I had not been thinking about it. I had no idea that there was a career in the marine industry. It never crossed my mind. Even though being an engineer, working on from elevators to reciprocating engines to fiber optics, it never occurred to me that there was that you could design boats, build wooden boats and things like that. I just thought that was for artisans and things like that. And so reading that article about, wow, there are people just like me that want to do a change of career, retirement, or fresh out of high school, that there's a place, a vocational training institution that is more like day camp for adults than school, where it's rigorous. You show, was at 7:30 we would show up?
It was a full,
Yeah.
it was a solid day.
Yeah, 7:30 to
8-9 hour
5.
day.
Yeah, of learning by doing. Yeah, under a skillful eye. So
Did the article come first, or your resignation? Or
The
you
article-
kind of knew already that you were not happy,
Right.
and needed a change, and then that came along?
yeah, it was. I had read the article, and it stuck in my mind, and we had that conversation, and then I was stuck on a flight to Paris for the corporation to solve somebody's problem overseas, and I was thinking, this is the last place I want to be, is on a jet, going to Europe, 10 days before Christmas. My second child is just coming. He says, I'm not going to be able to do this. It's not where my heart is. I want to do something else. When I got back, I turned in my resignation. And as events go, they kept me on for another year. And then when that was done, I went to the school. And I haven't looked back. Yeah.
So then, tell us about your business here. The name?
My business. So the name is Callinectes Boatworks. We're an LLC. Callinectes sapidus is the genus and species name of the Chesapeake Bay blue crab. And since my wife and I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay, we wanted to bring that name to Maine. But Callinectes means beautiful swimmer. Callo is the essence, the Greek word for the essence of beauty, not physical beauty, but the essence. And nectai is to swim. And sapidus is tasty. So we figured we want to have tasty, but beautiful swimmer I think is appropriate for what we do. We design and build classically styled runabouts. And the last handful of years we haven't built a new boat for over 4 years. We've just been restoring other people's boats. So that's typically what I do. And my commute is horrible. It's only 20 yards from my door in the house to the shop here. So I'm the home parent, and I do everything from here.
Do you prefer to restore or do you prefer to build from scratch?
I prefer to build from scratch. It's more, to me, it's more organic. You're starting with nothing, and you see it go along, and it's easier to quote. I find it easier to quote, and that made it easier with the client, so they know what they're getting into. Versus these older boats, what you can see by just looking at the boat might be this level of money and time that required. But once you start taking things apart and seeing where wood meets wood, it's usually up here. And so when you quote, you give the client an idea. It's going to be somewhere between here. Are you happy with that? And of course, everybody's interested in the low one. But you have to feel them out and say, it could be this if everything goes wrong. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where the most rub on these boats that have when they were designed, they're only meant to be working for 7 years. But the oldest boat I've had in the shop was over 100 years old. And it's still going because people like me and like Dave have that skill to breathe new life in these old things. Mm-hmm. But some of these boats are just barely being held together with dirt and detriment and old rusty thingamajiggers and bobs in there. Tight bomb and baling wire and chewing gum. And so some of the most interesting one is just taking what we call these gray boats that you just take it apart and use that part as your pattern, trace it out, make a new one, and then it's sort of like Legos, putting it back together again with these new woods. But it takes longer because you have to disassemble. And so that's where the price is. Sometimes it's easier just to build a brand new boat than having to restore.
So you sure have come across a boat that you couldn't restore?
Yeah, there's some boats that we just condemned. It says, nope, not worth it. As you're better off finding it. And typically, if they have a boat that they really like, it says, go find another one. Or have us look at it with you. Mm-hmm. Go find another one, and then that might be a starting point. I don't think many people, if they're, because these things pull at the heartstring. It's not really a necessity or a need to have them. So there has to be that love or passion behind these things. So to build a replica, it's just not the same. Mm-hmm. It's starting with something that has some history behind it.
Emotional connection to them.
Exactly. Yeah. Be it as they had one, or their grandparents had one they remember from childhood, or just like the classic car industry. Mm-hmm.
I think you told us earlier that you're building a boat right now. What, in the process of building it?
Yes, we're designing. In 2024, we wanted to release a 24-footer. So I'm not a naval architect, not a yacht designer, but I have looked at enough boats, so I started sketching. And I made, I didn't make line plans, but I made table of offsets for it. And I handed it to a naval architect friend of mine. He was looking at it and says, yeah, I think that'll work. He looked at my sketch and my numbers. He calls me back a few days later and says, it's marginal. I go, what does that mean, Steve? What does marginal mean? He says, well, you need to refine some hydrodynamics for it to be working with the power plant you want. So, okay. So I'm set back a little bit. So, spring is now winter release for this boat. So we're still trying to find a naval architect that will help with that. Since he's retired, he doesn't want to spend that much time behind a computer. But he's, having friends in the marine industry like that are very, very helpful. Because I could have just started building, and then put it in the water and go, well, almost. Well, go to the professionals when you need them.
Do you want to talk about your specialty in your business?
Yes, I can do that. We started the company in 2007. the company had some founding principles, and it was family fun, safety, and having a low imprint on the environment. So the boat that we designed, which is our Callinectes 16, which is its classically styled runabout here, it's incredibly light. It has a power package that only weighs 180 pounds, but it's 147 horsepower. It's a jet ski motor, specifically designed for boats such as this and applications such as this. The safety is that there's no revolving prop exposed for use, so you don't have to worry about lacerations due to that. It's light, so it can be towed behind smaller vehicles. Also light, so it doesn't have a large fuel consumption. So this boat can run all day on about 10 to 12. But this boat here, with this 1961 Mercury Tower of Power, 6 cylinders, will chew through 6 gallons in about 45 minutes. So there's a big difference there. And how we construct the boat using a method of vacuum bagging. It doesn't release so much styrenes into the air as you would hand laminate. So our boat that we designed here is a production boat. We do make it of fiberglass versus wood.
Can you explain to people what styrene is?
Styrene, yes, it's the volatile organic compounds that are released, the gases released from modern adhesives, like any varnish or oil-based paints have VOCs, and styrenes is the chemicals given off by epoxies and resin systems.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Well,
I want to know, I personally want to know, when you build boats or restore boats, is it typically the same species of wood, or are they all different? Like, what's a preferred, species to build?
Yes. So a lot of these classic boats from the 20s through the 60s were made from mahoganies. And during the war, mahogany was a prized material for the war effort, so they had to find other things, and they would use native cedars or Philippine mahogany, which is a cedar. And it's lighter, has a similar color, but it doesn't have the same structural issues. So most of the boats I find that we work on are Philippine mahogany or some kind of true mahogany, African or from other Central America locations. So that's most of the species there, but depending upon what structural member in a boat, we use white oak a lot.
Okay.
If it's like a rib or a frame, white oak, because it's sturdier and rot resistant.
So I thought oak is more porous.
It depends. Red oak has open pores,
Yeah.
where it would soak in water, but white oak has like has valves, so it doesn't allow water to flow through it. So white oak is the one that we choose for structural members. We also use Doug fir for anything that's longitudinal, from the length of the boat. And the nice thing about that, it's a weight-strength ratio type stuff that we look for, and also cost and price.
Sure.
So, but most of these things, this here is a mahogany veneered boat, and all the structural members here are mahogany. Whereas the other boats that we specialize in restoring century runabouts, and usually that's Philippine mahogany, usually, but not always. Depending on what they had on hand and what was available is what they made their boats out of back then.
Who's your supplier? Can I meet him?
This one, yeah, it varies. It varies, and with the pandemic that went through, a lot of the builders, I keep enough wood in stock to rebuild an entire boat. So I stock white oak and mahogany, and I have enough to build one boat in storage. So I had a little bit of trouble, but you find substitutes, and you might have to go find lesser grade to do certain things where you can get away with it. But the thing that hurt us most was plywood, getting plywood, good quality plywood. And also some of the goos and glues and adhesives that we use were harder to get because of the chemicals that were used in the petroleum products. So the prices went up, and so our suppliers have changed. Some companies went out of business, and having to find other sources. Like there's one product that the fiberglass industry uses that can bond fiberglass components to other fiberglass components. I won't mention their name. It's good, but it's very expensive. So I found another company that makes the same stuff for a third the price, and that's what I'll be using.
Who's that company? Will you mention them?
I'll let it pass.
All right, we'll beat that out.
But the things like that, the pandemic is an opportunity to change things up.
Sure.
To crushing, you always go this way because that's what you know, but let's go try something new and different and expose you to something new.
So your plywood business,
Yeah?
that's pretty, tell us about that. That was pretty interesting.
Yes, I was talking to Dave, a friend and I were finding trouble finding plywood that suits our needs. Because most of the plywood, even though they're marine grades, manufactured to marine standards, they're using cabinetry grade thicknesses, like a 1/16 of an inch. And with a boat that's sitting out in the sun, you need to have the opportunity to sand it and restain and refinish it. So you got maybe one sanding, one refinish, you can do that. So my friend and I talked to a local veneer shop that makes specialty weird shaped things. If you got anything that you want to make out of wood that's really odd shaped, this is the guy you go to. And he has been making custom plywood for us. And so what differentiates our plywood from what we can buy on the open market is that our finished veneers, our longitudinal veneers, are much thicker. You get more sanding, and also his process is paying attention to it. He's using resolcinol, which is a very good glue and sticks. What we were also finding a couple years ago when we were buying straight from the major distributor of marine plywoods with a nice mahogany finish is you can finish the boat properly, send it off, and the top veneers were delaminating. That means the glue bonds weren't as good. So, you're charging a client to put a new deck of $5,000 to $7,000. It comes back within your year because the plywood fails. And so that for us, even though there might be, maybe $2,500 of plywood, we have to eat the cost of $5,000 to deal with a product that really truly didn't meet the specifications that it was intended to meet. So we circumvent that, and our plywood is at least twice more expensive than we can find, but it'll last. It'll last like the original plywood that you would have bought with this boat would have lasted. I think it comes down to, people say, what is it? Is it the product? Is it the materials? I don't know. It could be the lack of knowledge, lack of attention now, or it could be the difference of what they're using. I don't know what it is, but there's something there that's missing than it was when these boats were first made.
So is your plywood, do you sell it, or is it just for you?
Yep, so he and I started, we did an investment. He bought me out, so he's doing it all because he was using a lot more, but he does sell sheets. He does sell sheets to people who want to buy it. But, a $4 sheet might be $600 to $800.
Yeah.
But you get, 5 to 7 times the duration than you would, and also not having to worry to delaminate falling apart the next year on you.
Will you tell us who he is?
Yeah, his name is Chris Cushman at Androscoggin Wooden Boats up in Wayne, Maine. And that's where you can find him if you need plywood. And I know that he's getting a new batch made right now, so.
That's where we're going next.
That's where we're going next.
All right.
Yeah, that's where we're going
Our
next.
tour of
A tour, yeah.
our tour of Maine boat
Tour of
builders.
Maine boat builders, right there. Yeah, yeah.
All right. Take a walk around.
I say so.
All right.
All right. You just want me to tell you a little history behind this boat?
Sure. Yeah. Tell us the history, how you got it, what
Okay.
the brand, why you like it, all the bits.
Okay, so this is a 1958 Whirlwind. The Whirlwind manufacturer didn't go by that name during the war, but they started building fuselages and floats for float planes during the war effort. And when the war ended, they said, well, what are we going to do with all this technology? And so they decided to make a boat product line from, I think, 14 or 13 feet to 20 feet. And this is an 18-footer, I think, in 1958. And the most interesting thing about this boat is what they call cold molded construction. I got some pieces here. So cold molded means is that you're using veneers, and this is an 1/8 inch, I think this Spanish cedar veneers. And so what they would do is they would have a mold, the shape of the boat that they're building they want to glue up around it. So they would bend their veneers, and they would constantly build up till they get the thickness that they want. I think this is either 4 or 6 ply. So you would you wouldn't do it like this because you don't want lines to, if they're different layers, the lines to line up. So they would do it opposing 45. So they would keep on gluing pieces up around the mold, and then they would stick it in a pressurized oven, and it would cure, and then that's how they get the shape. Because if you look at the boat, there are no seams, but it is a contour. It's like a contoured piece of plywood that takes the shape of the boat, and that's how they did it. And I like that because Dave and I, when we went to landing school, we were taught how to cold mold. And that means cold means we don't add heat, but this is a hot pressed molded boat.
So what's the glue that was used for these?
Resolvenol.
Okay.
That's a waterproof. It's black. It doesn't have any gap filling potential, but it's very tough and waterproof. I think it's the only truly waterproof glue out there on the market.
More than epoxy?
Epoxy allows water to migrate.
Really?
Yeah. So slowly, but it's not a guaranteed water barrier. So this boat I found at somebody's backyard rotting away, and it was sitting on the ground without a trailer. And I said, "That's a whirlwind. I haven't seen one that large before. I've only seen like 14 or 16 footer." And he says, "Can I have it?" He said, "Yeah, have it." He said, "But I'll sell you the motor with it." And so I bought this isn't the motor, but they sold me another motor with it. And then, so I took it. It's been in and out of the shop many times because it's my personal boat with other client boats coming in and taking the shop space. So I think I got it in 2017, and it's almost ready to, it's ready to put in the water. There's a few other things that need to happen, but now finally I get to put my own boat in the water after, that's 6 years of working on it. But what's new, the deck's new, the transom is new, the seat tops and bottoms are brand new, the sole's new, most of the windscreen is new, and the hatch is all new construction because it was just too far gone. I have an example of what the seats look like. We took the seats out to see if we could reuse them, and you can see this is just a typical example of all the splits that we filled, and somebody had upholstered nails in there, and there's kind of bowed, and we figured, no, we can salvage these seats, but it would look better if we just did all new. So we had to glue up new pieces for all the seat backs. So that's the type of attention to detail that we try to do for the boats.
And are all the wood on this boat mahogany?
There is some Spanish cedar, like here's a piece of Spanish cedar because we had to relaminate the windscreen frame. That's Spanish cedar. I think if we take this off, you'll see that's Spanish cedar. This is original piece. This deck, we vacuum bagged down. It's a plywood core that we epoxy coated the backside to allow to help manage the moisture penetration from the bottom through. And then we had thin veneers that we actually used to make our special plywood. We put down on the deck, and then we vacuum bagged it down as our clamping pressure. So we used the materials behind you, the peel ply, the beaver cloth, and plastic, bagged it, and then put our vacuum pump on it to suck all the air down. So it sucked it all down to the plywood, and that's why you don't see any seams or any fasteners. So it looks like plywood. So we actually did that one because we didn't have any plywood available at the time, because we just started the plywood shtick at the same time. But we had the veneers.
So what's the vacuum bagging process? How do you start? You go through it step by step. And the products?
It's tough. On a boat, it's a multi-step. So when we are doing see, I don't have any pictures here. So if it's a hull, it's different than the deck. I'll just do the deck because it's easier. So what we do is we have the flat surface on the boat, and then we start fitting our veneers, and our veneers look a lot like, here's one of the veneers that we would use for the plywood. You can see how thick it is. Mm-hmm. And that's at least twice, almost 3 times thicker than you would find on most marine plywoods that have a finished, what do they call this, a zebra? mahogany. And so we fit them together, the shape here along this line, so we cut with a razor blade to fit. And we lay them up, fit everything together dry, and then we would put, in this case, thickened epoxy down. We would wet out the surface with clear epoxy. We would do this with clear epoxy, and then we would trowel on with a V-notch trowel, thickened epoxy, and then we would lay these things down. And then we would put down peel ply. And this is just a nylon fabric that has a mold release agent in it, down up against the wood. And that is, if epoxy gets down there, it won't stick to it. You just pull it right off. And this material here is breather cloth. And so we lay this down first, and then breather cloth. And then we put plastic down. And along this edge here, we would have this tape, a butyl tape, or we call in the marine industry dum-dum tape. It's like chewing gum, but in long strips. And you put that down, and that seals your bag down. And then you put your vacuum line on it and suck all the air out of it. And they say the pressure is like, I shoot for around, depending upon the application, I'm shooting for around 20 inches of mercury, which is like, I don't know, how many batteries, 40 batteries stacked on it, on the footprint. So it's pretty good. And then you let it cure overnight, because I just use slow curing West System epoxy. And then in the morning, turn off the pump, pull off your plastic, and you have what looks just like this, all completely flat and adhered down to the boat.
And how do you attach the edges of the veneer so it doesn't slide around?
Yeah, so that's there are two techniques. I learned from my friend who makes our plywood. There's a veneer tape. So when you do everything together, you can use veneer tape on the back side. But he says, Glenn, just tape on the top side, and then you don't have to worry about any compromising material between you and your epoxy and your wood.
Yeah.
So just do the top side, you just peel it off. So what I do is I can use blue tape, or I can use his veneer tape.
Just regular blue masking tape.
Blue masking tape.
The regular painter's tape from Home Depot.
Yep. But I have to prefer using his veneer tape because it lets epoxy go through it. So now I don't have this big pile of bulge underneath the blue, and I can just peel it off with the heat gun and a scraper. It comes right off. It gets the excess off. So, but and then that's one method. You can do it underneath. And the second one is on top, or the third is they have plastic staples that you can staple them in. But then you can have these little pinholes, and I don't typically do that unless I'm in a really quick mode where you're not going to be able to see it. Like for example, in the boat, in the hull, there was some rot, and since this is this boat here was a hot pressed, cold molded, that it had some rock damage in back, and what it did is it penetrated the first veneer, and then the first glue seam, and it stopped. But water would collect in there and between the glue seams. So you had a big section of this boat that only the middle laminate was rotten. So it was like a hollow. It was like a hollow hull. So I had to route all that out. And it was about, I would say, 4 feet by 3 feet section where I had to route out and re-laminate and vacuum bag. And I was using plastic staples to hold it in place before the bag went down because it's all curved. So I was just stapling the heck out of it.
It's almost a wooden boat version of a modern day blister in a fiberglass hull.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's 2 large sections aft on this boat that have new laminates down because of rock damage. And that was, I guess any modern wooden boat, you have to worry about if you go through the surface finish. I always supply a new boat that I supply with somebody. I get some fingernail polish, dump it all out, clean it out with acetone, and then fill it with whatever varnish system they ask me to use. And so they have that in their glove box, so whenever they scrape the wood, they can go out there and just paint it on, and that prevents the water from getting down there because you'll have black staining. Just like literally within days if you don't seal it up.
So the finish on this deck and hull, it's varnished?
It's varnished. This one is Epiphane's 12 coats, rolled and tipped.
Okay.
So it's rolled with a nappy roller, and then I think we tipped with foam brushes. Um, I use foam mostly, but the thing that you have to be cognizant of is when you're using foam, it leaves thinner layers of varnish. Where if I used a hairbrush, it leaves it thicker.
Yeah.
So some boats, depending upon, I know what type of wood it is and how much I would use a hairbrush. But we don't like to keep much solvents in here because of the EPA requirements and recording of that. So unfortunately, we will throw the foam brushes away versus having to clean hairbrushes all the time.
Yeah.
So, but my very fine brushes, and I think, so we started the company in 2007. This is only the second gallon of acetone I had to buy last year. So that's how little thinners we use in the shop, and that's just one of our things about keeping the environment nice in the environment, except for throwing away foam brushes. Give and take, give and take.
Always a compromise.
Always a compromise. There's always a compromise.
So your base coat on the varnish, what do you start with? From bare wood, what's your first step?
From bare wood, we will stain it, and I think this is a Chris Craft red mahogany stain on this boat. Looks like it, or it could be a Century red. It might be a Century since it probably when I was working on this, I was working on two of the Centuries at the same time, so it's probably a Century red. And then you let that dry. So you put on, so if you finish sand the wood, you don't want to go too far. You don't want to go beyond probably 120 sanding it. Otherwise, the stain won't have enough scratches to hold into.
Okay.
You always go sand with the grain of the wood. Some people go down to 220 and the stain looks thin.
Yeah.
So the rougher the better. Even some cans say sand to 80. Sand to 80, I'm going, no. It's too much, too dark. So I do 120, 160, and then I put stain, and then you brush on the stain, then you have to wipe it off. And if it's a hot day and you're sweating, the sweat will leave a little fisheye. So you have to restain that little area. So you choose your days and wear a headband so you're not dripping sweat on it. And then let that dry probably 48 hours, not just one day, but 48 hours. And then I will put down 3 to 4 coats of wood sealer.
Epiphane's wood sealer?
Epiphane, I don't know if Epiphane has one, but I use a Pettit wood sealer, and Pettit seems to work well with Epiphanes, haven't had any issues, but I also use Pettit Captain's varnish too. Those are the two that I like to use, but this is Epiphanes.
How about the brand of the stain? Is that important?
It depends on what color you're after. Interlux makes a full range of mostly Chris Craft colors. You have to go to Sandusky to get the Century colors. And the Century and Chris Crafts are about the same, but there's a little bit different. So depending on what boat I would use use either one. So there's that. So I put 3 or 4 coats of wood sealer on it. It dries quick. It sinks deeper in than a thin coat of varnish, and then I would just start building varnish. And varnish, I'd probably put 6 coat on, then flat sand, and then put another 6 top on that. Hopefully that's it. Okay. Your last coat is the one after you think you're done with. Yeah.
And then 3 more.
And then 3 more after that. Yeah. So, yeah.
So this is your own boat, and it took you quite a long time. I assume because you're working on it when you have time.
Exactly. This was a filler, so I would have 2 weeks here and a week here, so it would roll out, put it in the shed, and roll back in. So most of the boats that come in here take anywhere between 3 to 6 months, usually around 3, and that's a lot of the boats come in for, well, it's a fair share of reconstruction, repairs, and refinishing. And refinishing, even if you're just scuffing up varnish or putting on maintenance coats, we call it 3 coats. That's about 7 full days to get that done. So you have 7 working days, so let's call it a week and a half of their time boat here, because you have to take everything off. You got to sand, you got to mask, you had to put on 3 coats, which is sanding, vacuuming, wiping down, and then put it on and then leave. And coming back in the morning, sanding, doing the same thing over, put a coat down, leave. And then you have to put everything back on. And you know, it doesn't take long to take everything off, but to get everything back on properly takes a little bit more time.
So what's your preferred method for rebedding hardware?
I like using traditional bedding compound.
Okay.
Yeah, I know a lot of my colleagues use 4200.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with that is, the boat's going to have to come back in a year or two to be revarnished. Why suffer through having to pry things off and having to razor blade things off? You have to razor blade this, but it comes off easy, and it also razor blades off easier, and it's easier to sand through if you need to. Yeah. That's my preferred way. But if it's a fiberglass boat, oh heck yeah, I'm using the modern adhesive. But if it's a wood boat, I'm going to go with the traditional turpentine based bedding stuff.
So how much time do you get to spend on this boat?
Haven't had any yet. You mean using it?
Yes.
Yeah, I haven't used it yet. No, I haven't used it yet. We have a boat out in the shop, out in the shed out here that I restored a while ago. It's a 1941 Correct Craft. In the last 3 years, that has been our camp boat. And our camping season is all summer. My wife and I own our own businesses, so we try to take 3-day weekends every week we can. And so every day we'd be on the boat at least an hour, hour and a half. Mm-hmm. And so that would be our summer boat. And it's a cute little 16. It's teeny tiny. It doesn't go very fast. It sounds just like a tractor. But we can show you that. But so I'm lucky that I'm a boat builder that actually gets to use the boat every now and again. But summers is typically slower in the sense that you get all your work done before spring. You get your spring commissioning, all the boats that come in to get commissioned and put in the water, and then you have summer that is mostly repair. And then winter, we have a lot of restorations to do. Mm-hmm. And that's where I have intentionally not filled my backlog this year to help design that 24-footer we were talking about and to start the prep of building it. But I do have a project boat next door that's a typical example of the condition of restorations look like when they arrive here.
Right.
You want to look at it now?
Yeah, let's take a look at it.
Yeah.
All right. But this is a good example of what a finished boat, well, that other Century you can see.
Yeah, the other one down there.
Yeah.
Maybe before we head out, Glenn,
Yeah.
if you show us the core material, the fiberglass sample,
Okay, yeah.
while we're inside.
Yeah, sure. Let's start over here. Start here. So this is a piece of, I don't know why ribbon mahogany. That's the type. I meant zebra, but it's ribbon mahogany. So this is a typical piece of plywood that you would buy from marine industry for something that you would use on an interior. But look how thin that finished veneer is. Look how thin it is.
You almost can't even see it.
You almost can't even see it.
I don't even know if it show up in here.
And this is a Luan product, and you can see that it's not layered. It's more like an extruded product. Mm-hmm. But this is a typical example of the exterior veneers that we would get on exterior grade marine plywood. And you can see there's not much to it. And so I don't have an example of pieces here. That's another example. That's cabinetry stuff. I don't have a full sheet here, but I can show you the differences in thicknesses of those veneers. So you look at that. Now look at that.
Yeah.
And this is what we're using in our plywood. It makes a tremendous difference.
Mm-hmm.
Do you only do mahogany plywood?
We only do mahogany because that's what we typically, that deck is mahogany. A lot of the interior pieces and seat backs and seat bottoms would be made out of plywood. A lot of the transoms that we work on custom boats are plywood. Mm-hmm. So that's why we decided to go this. Even though it costs more initially, long term, you don't have to worry.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry. So the boats, my production boats are fiberglass, and you were asking me earlier about how they're built. So we have molds that we use to mold the boat's end to for the hull and also the deck. This is an example of the deck, for instance. People are standing on the decks and moving around. And this is a cord material. It has fiberglass with gel coat, fiberglass, and then this is, was it 3/4 inch balsa, and then more glass on the bottom side. And this is a cord material. It's you can't even bend it. It's so stiff, but it's very light, extremely light. And that's the decking material. Now the hull material is using this kind of fiberglass. It's just 1708. It has a woven construction on one side and then random glass mat on the other side. And it's for building up bulk. And that's one type of fiberglass. You can see it's kind of heavy.
And what does 1708 mean?
1708, I think it's let's see, might have this back assward, so to speak.
Okay.
Like 8 ounce of this roving type stuff here, and then a 17 ounce of this the woven. So the roving and woven.
Yeah.
And it's telling you the weight specification. Like this is a 8 ounce glass here, and it's just a fabric, and we use this for abrasion resistance and like sheathing. Usually either use 6 or 8, usually 6 on canoes. And this is another part. This is called tabbing. So if you have a piece that you wanted to glass up to something else, like we had a joint here, you would make a fillet, which is an arch, and you would glass it together like this, and it's just tabbing. And you would use multiple pieces of this, since this is only 8 ounce tabbing. So fiberglass comes in different weights, different weaves, from random, just kind of loose stuff here, to woven. And so our production vessel, instead of using the balsa coring, we use what we call Sortex. And this is an example of a coring material that allows, you can see the little pincushion holes in it. It allows the resin to flow through it, so it can be, you can have glasses, layers like this, like a sandwich. And what it does is it gets the 2 layers further apart, increases strength, but you're not increasing the weight as much. Mm-hmm. But since the holes allow the resin to flow through it into both sides, that's when we're vacuum infusing our hulls. So we would lay up all of our materials in our mold dry, and then we would hook a suction line up and then a feed line on the mold while it's under vacuum, and it would suck the resin. Actually, it doesn't suck it, it pushes the resin through all the weaves of the glass and the materials, and then you're reducing the weight of the hull, because you're controlling the thickness. Instead of if you're just hand laying up, you just keep on adding glass and resin to it. And sometimes when you're hand laminating, you don't know if your glass is still touching or if it starts to float. If you have too much resin, you're starting to float. Yeah. So if you're vacuum infusing it, you're controlling the thickness and also the amount of resin and also the weight, and also you're capturing the volatile and organic compounds that would go into your atmosphere.
Right.
So, and that's why we chose on our production boats to do vacuum infusion, weight, and also environment.
What type of resin do you like to use?
In the shop here, I use West System, epoxy. Mm-hmm. A production boat is usually a vinyl ester, I think. Mm-hmm. Whatever he has on stock. We typically go with a higher grade for less water migration purposes.
So what's the difference? So polyester, vinyl ester, and epoxy. They're the 3 main resins used in fiberglass. So what's the difference between them?
Price, and also osmosis, the water osmosis, the water permeability issues.
Or blisters.
Yeah, or blisters for blistering, long term. So when you think you get a fiberglass boat, it's not. Water will migrate through the gel coat into the glass. It just will, because of the resin, because it's just not it's a chemical, and chemicals love to absorb air and water and things like that, and it is sort of porous. So we're talking about resorcinol is the only truly waterproof glue out there, but I think the second best would be epoxy. And then I don't remember if it's vinyl ester then polyester.
It's epoxy, vinyl ester, and polyester.
Yeah. So polyester, yeah. So I think we typically use vinyl ester on our production. So that's the differences there. But I'm not, even though I've been trained in fiberglass and carbon and Kevlar and things like that, I don't like doing it. So I typically don't. I farm that out to 2 other friends.
So how do you hold? So you have all these layers of fiberglass together in the mold.
Yep.
How do you hold them together until it's vacuum infused?
Yeah, you can use spray adhesive like Spray 77, the spray.
Just out of the spray can.
Yeah, spray can. But with vacuum infusion, you know, some people, when you're spraying painting, things like that, you do that. You don't want to do that, because that spray, when it hardens, doesn't allow the resin to penetrate the glass. So you have to just go shh.
Just enough to barely hold it.
Just barely hold it. barely hold it. Not like spray a model with their hair thing, and so when the wind
So in
blows
that
it.
case, blue touch and not pink touch.
Blue touch. We have a sailing friend who describes, like
Male touch versus female. Blue
Yeah,
touch
exactly.
Versus pink touch.
Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
a blue touch, definitely a blue touch. Yeah, that's it.
Oh, that would be pink touch. Blue touch would be.
Okay, all right, gotcha.
Well, I meant for, like you were saying, like hairspray.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to hairspray, maybe the females have the blue touch.
The blue touch, they had the blue touch, they didn't want their hair to move. Yeah, exactly. I see. Yep, that's what I was. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are tricks to each ways. For those that the home hobbyist that want to do boat repair and dabble in glass and epoxy and things like that. There's some do's and don'ts. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that know most of the don'ts unknowingly. So, YouTube is a great resource, but you got to be cognizant of where their training knowledge came from.
So in the mold, so the very first thing you do with a mold, what do you start with before you're going to lay up
You
fiberglass?
clean it.
Okay.
Not once, not twice, 3 times. You make it really, really clean, and then you wax the heck out of it. And there's this tape test because you're waxing, and there's several types of wax. There's mold release agents that are spray, which is what they call a polyvinyl alcohol, PVA spray, or you can just build up wax, mold release waxes. And there's a tape test that when we produce we finish waxing it up, you take a piece of tape and you stick it to it, and if the tape doesn't stick and just falls off, you got enough wax.
Okay.
And then you want to make sure you don't get any particles on it, and then you would spray your gel coat on it. And then depending upon how you're doing it, you let that kick, and then you can start laying up your dry materials. And then we're talking about vacuum bagging, you do the same technique. You have your peel ply, your flow media, or
Breather.
whatever, breather cloth, whatever you want, and then you push your resin through. Yeah. So, but it's time intensive and labor intensive. The gel coat only can kick when it doesn't have any air on it, so you have to add wax to it. And the wax goes to the outside and doesn't let air in it, so it goes hard. But a lot of people will do post finishing work on their vacuum infusions, so they would just vacuum infuse up against the mold and then post finish with spraying all grip or paint or a gel coat, things like that on that. So there are 2 methods.
Okay.
And I don't do that stuff. So there are probably new tricks to the trade that I do not know and won't even possibly even let you think that I know what they are.
We'll wait till we go to the fiberglass
We'll
shop
wait
for
till
that.
you go to the fiberglass shop, yeah.
Take a walk outside?
Let's take a walk outside. I think a 52 Century Resort 16-footer. This is typically condition of the boat that we get to restore. You see the varnish is peeling. This deck was actually supposed to be blonde, but somebody had stained over it. You can see that it's much lighter. Well, you can't really, but it's a yellow color like cedar, but it's a type of blonde mahogany. So we'll have to strip this thing all down, and then we'll have to assess what wood needs to be replaced. I see on the other side, the port side, there's some cracking along the covering boards here, so we'll have to replace that. But this client wants this converted from an inboard to an outboard, which will be interesting. So you can kind of see the inside and the ribs and the frames back here, how it's constructed. So all these frames here are white oak. Moving up here, and they're bolted through this way, and then through, this is a chine log, and there should be a carriage bolt that runs through the chine log through here, and I don't see one or feel one, so maybe that's been a repair, but there should be on every frame holding it together. So, and these are engine logs where the engine would sit on, and that keel will have to be replaced because it has a shaft log and also a rudder hole. So since it's going to be an outboard, we don't need those, so we'll replace, I don't know if we're replacing the entire keel yet until I get the boat opened up, or just doing a section fill. So, but this is a typical condition of what would come in, and It had some big, probably Chrysler or Ford motor in there at one time, and this one doesn't have it in there.
So without the engine replacement, like if the engine was staying where it is, like where do you even begin? Like how many hours would this be?
I'll know better when I get it in the shop and look at it. But the beginning would be is to take all this stuff out, the tank, and just start probing with an ice pick or a pencil or screwdriver to find out localized rot. That would be level 1 diagnostic. And then I'm going to flip the boat over, and since it is, it's sort of like original bottom and hasn't been using the modern adhesive, I am going to take each bottom plank off.
Okay.
And then I can see where the bottom planks meet the ribs, how good the ribs surfaces, the frame surfaces are, and then from there I can give an accurate timeline on what it would take. I will, when we flip the boat over, take the bottom off, we'll know how many hours we'll have to anticipate doing it. Now all I can say is how long it's going to take to strip the boat and put a new transom in and build the new components, but I don't know what the bottom and frames would look like until I start taking it apart. But I would start by just that, turning the boat upside down, start taking the bottom off. And it has to be wooded. That means taking all this finish off, which is a combination of scraping with a hot gun and then sanding. But I mean, looking at it, it doesn't look bad. Doesn't look bad underneath there. It's just a lot of sweat equity to get all this off. But luckily, it's that easy right now. Yeah.
And what type of wooden boat construction is this?
This is batten seam, so it's sort of like a carvel plank where the planks abut one another, but behind each of these seams is a batten. So you can see on that side over there, see those strips that runs, those are the battens.
Yep.
Yep.
Is there any glue in with this?
No, these boats were dry fit.
Okay.
But when I put it together, I use Boat Life versus Boat Life is a caulk that's flexible, but it's not really an adhesive.
Okay.
And I do that so if somebody runs into something or needs a replacement and they come back to me, I don't have to fight peeling the wood away from that adhesive and having to clean it up.
So as opposed to like a 5200.
5200 is permanent, 4200 is supposedly removable, but it takes a little bit of doing.
Okay.
Yeah, so I use Boat Life instead. That's just my preference.
Right.
But there's nothing wrong with the other stuff. It's just that if you know you're possibly going to have to deal with it, work smarter.
So say the transom wasn't getting redone, and there's like an average amount of bottom repair, an average amount of things you normally encounter. Is this like a $500 restoration?
This in itself will be somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 restoration.
Okay. To make it look like the boat inside.
Like the boat inside or the one we're going to see next.
The one we're going to next.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And that's a good transition right there to the next boat.
Yep.
One that's sticking out. Really busy in the shop and sat out here till just last year. Again, this is a 1952 Century Resorter, just like that old boat that we saw on the side there, the gray boat we call it. This is a full restored boat. We had to replace the transom. We had to replace one engine stringer, a few planking. We decided to do a different type of restoration, which is called renovation, which is using all the existing wood we can, but just making repairs to the wood as we go along. So we see some cracks here that we decided that we could fill them with epoxy, so we didn't have to replace the plank. That just creates more of the original wood is here on this boat.
So were these built as ski boats?
These were built as ski boats. You can see the ski ring there, and you see people ask, why is the ski ring in the middle of the boat? That's so that in some, I guess, plastic boats, they put the ski equipment on the back, but then you have the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah.
And so that puts the pressure and the force in the middle of the boat, especially in front of that engine, so it keeps the boat tracking straight.
Yeah.
And the difference between Centuries and Centuries, the second largest producer during the time of the classic mahogany boats. Chris-Craft was the first. And the difference between the Chris Crafts and the Centuries was how it was built, the bottoms were built, and the size of the engines. Centuries used a much larger horsepower engines, and they were built a little bit lighter, and so they were known as the fastest boats on the lakes.
So what, like out of the showroom, what speed would you get, and what's your horsepower?
This one is using a Ford Y block that only has about 160 horsepower. I don't know how fast it is. I never clocked it. Never tried to clock them. Yeah, but this Y block, it's so smooth and so quiet. I have to say it has won my heart. But this is an example of fully restored boat, and this vinyl is not original, but it's a second generation. Typically we would have to replace that too, but it was in good enough space or condition that we just kept it.
Wow.
Except for one place over here where a mouse chewed through it. So we affectionately call it Mouse in the shop. And that's a Ford Y, that's a rebuilt Ford Y block.
Do you do the engine rebuild yourself?
I do not. There's a local guy, Jim, who's fantastic. He threatens to retire. He is so knowledgeable and so good that when he goes on, I don't know what we're going to do. But so an engine restoration, a cosmetics around 3,000. Full restoration is somewhere between 6 and 9,
Okay.
depending upon what needs to happen.
Does that include the transmission too?
No, we would send that off to another. Well, some transmissions he can do, but usually we send that off to. Oops, are you okay? We send it off to New England Transmission.
It's a heavy engine. It's a heavy lid.
It has a lead foam.
Oh, for sound.
Yeah, it is very heavy.
Katja, can you guide that end in? Oh, we got it.
Yeah, we got it. So it has neat features like a searchlight that you can control underneath the dash. It has this here as a vent, and you can open and close the vent by a lever on the dash, so you can get some airflow down around your feet. This horn, I think, was original, but it requires 110 psi to operate.
Like a train horn.
It's like a train horn. And my compressor that I installed in it doesn't do enough, so it goes honk, honk versus honk, honk. So if the client wants an upgrade, we'll have to get them another compressor.
All right.
So this is the typical restorations that we would do on Centuries.
This is great to see basically a before and after of the same boat.
Yeah,
That's cool.
it's different. You notice how the deck on that previous boat was basically raw wood look, but that's what it should look like once it's all done.
And what type of wood is this?
It's a blonde mahogany. I think it's called, it's not Ava, it's Ava something, There's a little subtitle saying
We'll put
it's
a
blah, blah,
disclaimer.
blah, 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 like that.
Avoiding the raindrops. And this is 16 feet? What size?
16 feet, yeah.
Okay.
This is a 16 footer, yeah.
And then if we jump to your boat,
So this is hull number 4 of our production boat, and this is a Callinectes 16. This is the stripped down version that we built, but we haven't finished because we didn't have an order for it. The other 3 were sold, and this one we just want to have one in inventory that's near done. And it's been sitting here for several years because I stopped marketing. I've just been so busy with restoring other people's boats, I haven't had a chance to go back and start marketing this thing. Every now and then I give a phone call. But you can see it's traditionally styled. We've done blue, and most people prefer this color, so we have just gone with this. We've done 1 blue, and then I guess this is 3 of this color, claret, which sort of looks like a mahogany. And I call it the stripped down version. So we get a fiberglass deck, fiberglass hull from my supplier, and then we accentuate it with wood. And this one only has the wood I call covering boards, but the other 3 that we made have hand-laid decks, just like this boat here, but matching mahogany, so we have pinstripes.
Okay.
But I sort of like how the wood pops against this nice fiberglass deck, and we do pop-up fittings, so have it really streamlined and look very sleek. And traditional hardware, this is Chris Craft Riviera hardware, but a traditional windscreen. The plywood, this is the engine control, and you can see the ribbon mahogany. So everything's here. We just put it back together once we got all the systems in place. There's the jet ski motor. It's a Weber 750 100cc dry sump engine. It's fuel injected, turbocharged. Dry sump is that it doesn't rely on piston slap to lubricate the rods and crank, anything like that. It's injected in the amounts that it's needed. But there's our 13-gallon tank. We have a sound suppression system that hangs off this strut.
So you're good for more than all day with that tank.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Yep. Yep. And you can see we put a lot of thought into drainage. So all these rails here drain into a plumbing system that doesn't go into the bilge but goes directly out of the boat. Since this usually would have a flush deck, we had to put in rain channels so the water can go straight out. Again, more flush for a well, I have my other hand. You can probably pop that open for your pole light. So we try to keep everything flush and looking sleek. But it is traditionally styled, very, very light.
What's the boat weigh?
Wet, fully fueled, 1,100 pounds.
Oh wow! So you can tow this with the family minivan.
Yep, you can. Yep. Yep.
Nice. So what's the cost of this?
This here is 55,000.
Okay.
With the hand laid deck is another 10 on top of that. So we do that semi-custom build. So things that are standard are the hull shape. We have different configurations of the interior that people like. Most people like to walk through. Some people wanted a full, I don't know what they call it. These are glove boxes, but people want a full thwart.
Yep.
So we've done that. The dash arrangement's different. That's why we haven't put any gauges in, because we don't know what people want,
Okay.
or what style they want. It has a little glove box up there that has auxiliary power and an iTunes jack, or phone jack, so you can power all the speakers. We've had some clients that really want a lot of interesting interior courtesy lights. We made a tender that was blue it was fully tricked out, and they wanted forward storage and footrests, so we made custom footrest and storage up there. So it just depends what clients want.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can you set this up to ski with it?
You can. Yep. You can. It's small, and
Tube towing.
tube towing is typically what you do, but I've gotten skiers up on them.
Yeah.
But I prefer tubing on it.
Mm-hmm.
And this one right here, this is a 1941 Correct Craft. This is the boat that the Cypress Garden skiers would use back in the day. This is a junior, so this is the smallest one they would make, and this one only has 40 horsepower. But this is a boat that we found as a barn find, and we just used the original boat as a pattern to make this boat off of.
Oh, so you built this boat brand new?
Based off of a gray boat.
Okay.
A boat that wasn't worth restoring, but we took all the parts off. There are parts that are still here, like for example, the engine box, original. Two of the ceiling boards are original, and we had to manufacture new ones. This port member here is original. That seat box is original. The Ford seat box is original. Everything else, new.
Okay. And what's the construction method for this one?
This is plywood.
Oh, really?
This is plywood. Yeah.
Oh.
I saw this boat. I said, I hate to see this not be restored. And this is the boat that we used at our lake camp for the last 3 years, and I'm going to sell it now. Yep. I've used it. I restored it. Now it's somebody else's prize to keep.
Yeah.
But
So what type of plywood did you use, and how thick is it? And is it glassed over?
It is not glassed over. It's 3/8 Sapelli, no, Meranti, 3/8 Moranti, using our plywood for the deck, our custom-made plywood for the deck. Has 7 coats of epoxy barrier paint on the tops and bottom bottom side, and then we finish coat painted. The rest was just enamel, topside enamel. And the engine is let's see how far I can get it back. It's a restored original gray Phantom 4.
You'll take this board out?
Take that one out and get back further. Let me set this down here just a second. There we go. This is a 4-cylinder. This one generates 40 horsepower, but if you had 2 carburetors, it would generate 60 horsepower. And when I bought the boat, this guy had sent this engine to a engine restoration place that specializes in car engines, and we got the engine back, and we had to rebuild the top end and the transmission ourselves.
Oh,
They didn't quite finish their work.
yeah.
But it sounds just like that tractor. And it has, here's your starter motor, your generator that has a shaft that powers the coolant pump, and the coolant pump have these compression. You fill these up with grease, and every couple months you just give it a half turn, and it lubricates the pump. So there's really interesting things on these old boats. You look at these old technologies and what they employed and how they did things. It's really fascinating. And it's a 6-volt system versus a 12-volt system.
Can I walk on this?
Yes, yeah, hell yeah.
And then, while we're going through your boat shop, how much is this one?
This
Do you know?
we'll put on the market for around $28,000.
Okay. Anybody happens to be interested in some boats?
Yeah, it's it's a small little boat. There's not many of these things out there. I think we probably have $20,000 of our time in it. So I think for us to make any money, we'd have to sell it for over 27. But I don't think anybody will buy it for over that.
Yeah. Thanks, Glenn.
You're welcome, man.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Hopefully this came out okay in the rain.
Oh, let's hope so.
I think it did.
Yeah, let me know.
We were close.
And we'll leave the tops off because I'll bring them out and wash them and put them back
Okay.
later. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
We're done.
You're welcome. All right.